world concept. Before I got to AA, I was seriously confused. Eventually, I realized that much of my confusion resulted not only from alcoholism, but also from living simultaneously, without realizing it and without a roadmap, in two entirely different worlds. One outside and one inside my head. We are spiritual beings, and we manifest our spirituality by our actions, by our thinking, and by our feelings. These three areas are not equally represented in the two worlds. All our actions take place in the outer world, while our thoughts and feelings are confined to the secret inner world. Thus, serenity and joy, plus all spiritual beliefs and feelings, and many of the most important things in life, are exclusively inner world matters. In the other world, the world of reality, hard work often leads to success. In the world of the mind, however, working on a problem often leads to chaos. Although work works in the outside world, work that becomes worry commonly worsens situations in the inner world. How does one learn to live comfortably and simultaneously in two different worlds? I began by paying attention from moment to moment to whether I am thinking, feeling, or acting. The answer tells me which world I'm functioning in. Good intentions and loving thoughts, for example, take place in the inner world, but count for little or nothing unless acted out in the real world. Then I began to study the character and functions of boundaries, especially personal boundaries. I learned that everything alive has boundaries. Without them, life on earth cannot exist. Henry Cloud and John Townsend stress the importance of boundaries in their book, Boundaries: When to Say Yes, When to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. I found the condition of my personal boundaries to be chaotic. Important people were prevented from looking into my inner world. I was afraid of what they might see. On the other hand, dangerous and foolish ideas had ready access. I was afraid people wouldn't like me if I didn't agree with them. Additional items raced back and forth as if no border existed. More important, I learned that control of my boundaries is entirely my personal responsibility. We all have boundaries. Every microscopic cell of every animal and plant in all the world is separated from its environment by a boundary, a wall, a membrane. Every form of life has a mortal dependency on its personal wall of life. The tiny, one-celled amoeba, visible only through a microscope, could not exist in its watery home if it were not for the membrane, the wall that separates the outside world from the amoeba's inside world. This wall lets in exactly the right amount of fluid, no more and no less. It lets in nutrients, just the right kind and just the right amount. In addition, it lets out precisely the right amount and kind of wastes, which otherwise would kill the organism. Scientists speak of this kind of membrane as being semi-permeable. Permeable means things can get through. Semi-permeable means only certain things can get through. And, more important, many substances which pass readily in one direction cannot move back in the opposite direction. Not all boundary walls are microscopic. Nations have walls, some as massive as the Great Wall of China, or as notorious as the Berlin Wall. Others are just a line on a map. Boundaries serve to keep some people and certain items in, and other people and items out. Houses have boundaries referred to as walls. The doors, the windows, screens, locks, doorbells, peepholes, and so forth, serve to allow in or out only approved items and individuals at only approved times. Some walls are less obvious than others. Each of us, for example, has a wall so obscure it can't be seen with a microscope. Yet it determines precisely who we are, and it completely controls our relationships with the world. This wall separates the physical world from the psychological world. It separates the world outside from the world inside. It separates what happens in reality from what happens in our minds. By doing so, it totally controls our mental, emotional, and spiritual sobriety. Some of us have impenetrable walls. People can't get in, and we can't get out. We are literally alone in a crowd. Others of us have porous walls. We lack boundaries. We indiscriminately let people walk in and walk all over us. In addition to letting them control our feelings and our behavior, we repeatedly let them abuse and take advantage of us. We do have control. My all-time favorite newspaper comic is Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin is a 6-year-old hyperactive boy who, in his mind, has his own private one-passenger spaceship. When he feels the need to get away, Calvin leaves the schoolroom and travels to other planets and galaxies, passing unscathed through meteorite storms, death rays, intergalactic wars, and related disturbances well out of range of whatever is going on in school. Instead of allowing his teacher or classmates to upset him, Calvin closes the hatch and survives the school hours happy and snug alone in his tiny spaceship. Aware or not, each of us is totally responsible for the condition of our own spaceship. We, and we alone, decide who and what gets in with us, who and what is denied admission, and who and what is ejected. Before recovery on the assumption that it would make people like me, I let them into my ship by telling them the things about me I thought they would like, while keeping to myself the things I thought they would dislike. It didn't work. They didn't care for me, and neither did I. I'd given away all the good and kept all the bad, and then wondered why I felt so miserable. Today, I'm less likely to try to impress people with my accomplishments. Furthermore, there's nothing bad about me that I'm aware of that isn't already known by at least one person in AA. I've shared all that information with at least one person. As a result, it feels clean and pleasant in my spaceship. Each of us is responsible for what passes in either direction through our boundaries. This includes those of us who, without realizing they have a choice, chronically complain that others make them feel badly. A young man at our morning meeting, looking old for his age and squinting through the smoke from a cigarette burned down to almost nothing, said, "I have the impression people think of me as being very serious and very negative. They seem afraid to approach me because I'm always angry. That's not the way I really am deep down inside, but that's the way I act because I'm a reflection of what's going on in my life." Showing absolutely no awareness of being captain of his own spaceship, he described situations in his home which he insisted caused him to feel and act the way he did. he reminded me of me. I used to think, you'd drink too if you had my wife, my life, my problems. We live simultaneously in two worlds, the outer physical world, sometimes called the real world, and our secret inner world, the world where God is, where we do our thinking, feel our feelings, and establish our motives, attitudes, and goals. At one time, I allowed events in the real world to largely determine how I felt, what I did, and whether or not I drank. Today, I am more self-centered, centered in myself. With increasing frequency, all important decisions are made by me, and my life is devoted to keeping me comfortable inside, in spite of whatever is happening or not happening outside. Rudyard Kipling reflected this philosophy in his poem, If, when he said, "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you." In a similar vein, our 12th tradition tells us to keep principles, internal world, before personalities, external world. My area of responsibility. All my emotions reside in my inner world, and whether I admit it or not, the extent to which they reflect the outside world is my choice. I need to think like Linus in the Peanuts comic strip, who, when asked why he wasn't upset about the ridiculous things his older sister Lucy was doing, simply stated, "That's not my area of responsibility." While responsible for little that happens in the real world, I am totally responsible for what goes on in my mind and for what gets in and out past the border between my inner and outer worlds. Other people have only as much influence in these matters as I give them. Viktor Frankl recorded perhaps the ultimate example of this when he described how the Nazis controlled in every conceivable way the destiny of the Jews, but were never able to control their attitude toward their destiny. Without the individual Jews' permission, the Nazis could not penetrate the boundary between that individual's inner and outer worlds. I've gone so far with this concept of responsibility as to give Max a written Declaration of Independence. In it, I accept total responsibility for my feelings. I tell her I feel angry, but no longer can I say, "You made me angry." My feelings derive from me, not from her. By the same reasoning, she is responsible for her feelings. When she feels badly, I can be understanding and supportive, but I don't have to feel responsible. And I don't always have to participate in her feelings. We were so enmeshed at one time in the past that a little voice in my head asked me, "Why don't we just be compassionate instead of getting upset every time she becomes irritable?" Most important, my Declaration of Independence completely eliminates emotional blackmail as a manipulative technique. In past years, the threat of taking a drink or of quitting meetings got Max's attention. Not anymore. Al-Anon took care of that. Incidentally, in my experience, alcoholics with an alcoholic spouse, relative, or friend can profit greatly by joining Al-Anon, but only as an Al-Anon member, not as an alcoholic. True, the steps are the same, but the perspective is entirely different. In AA, the primary focus is on alcohol. In Al-Anon, it's another person, an alcoholic. And other alcoholics give many of us alcoholics some of our biggest problems. As for alcoholics attending Al-Anon meetings, in my opinion, it is inappropriate to announce at any 12-step meeting, whether it be AA, NA, CA, OA, Al-Anon, or whatever, that one is a member of one of the other organizations. Such information is no more relevant to the purpose of that meeting than stating at an AA meeting that one is a compulsive overeater, sex addict, Al-Anon member, Catholic, Republican, doctor, priest, or insurance salesman. As far as the Declaration of Independence is concerned, I must admit it isn't as dangerous as it sounds. The contract is actually between me and the committee in my head. It helps me remember the line quoted earlier from the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Quote, "It is a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us." End quote. It also helps me to remember the words of the lady at an Al-Anon meeting years ago when she quoted Eleanor Roosevelt as having said, quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." End quote. I remember thinking to myself, gee, if they can't make me feel inferior, they can't make me feel any emotion I don't want to have. Psychologists and others who know about such things suggest that the first thing we should do when upset is to realize what is going on. We should say, for example, "I am upset." Then we should give ourselves permission to feel upset. Just because we are no longer newcomers and are sponsoring others doesn't mean we should never feel disturbed. It means we don't drink over our bad feelings. It also means that to the extent that we value our emotional sobriety, we don't sit around wallowing in the bad feelings for an extended period of time. In addition to recognizing and giving ourselves permission to feel feelings, we should name them. Those of us who grew up in homes where the only feeling ever expressed was anger must first learn the names of the feelings. In case you don't know the language of feelings, here are the names of a few. Abandoned, admired, adored. Affectionate, afraid, aggressive. Alarmed, alert, alienated. Amazed, amused, angry. Annoyed, antagonistic, anxious. Apathetic, apologetic, appreciated. Apprehensive, approved of, ashamed. At ease. Awed. Baffled, bashful, bewildered, bitter, blissful, bored, brave, brilliant. Capable, cautious, comfortable, concerned. Confused, content, courageous, curious, cynical. Degraded, dejected, delighted, dependent, depressed, despised. Determined, detested, disappointed, discontented, disgruntled, dissatisfied. Eager, ecstatic, edgy, elated. Embarrassed, enchanted, enraged, enthusiastic, envious, estranged, exasperated, excited, exhausted, fatigued, fed up, forlorn, friendly, frightened, frustrated, furious, glad, gloomy, gratified, guilty, happy, hateful, hapless, hopeful, hopeless, horrified, humiliated, hurt, hysterical, impatient, important, inadequate, independent, indifferent, indignant, infuriated, inhibited, innocent, inspired, interested, jealous, jolly, joyful, lethargic. Liked, listless, lonely. Loved, mad, mischievous, miserable, mixed up, moody, negative, nervous, obstinate, optimistic, pained, panicky, paranoid, passionate, peaceful, pleased, popular, proud, provoked, puzzled, regretful, rejected, relaxed, relieved. Reluctant, resentful, sad, scared, seductive, serene, sheepish, shocked. Shy, sick, smart, strong, surprised, suspicious, sympathetic. Tense, terrified, threatened, timid, tired, torn up, trapped, troubled, turned off, turned on, uncomfortable, undecided, unhappy, unimportant, unloved, unwanted, unpopular, unsure, upset, useless, vengeful, vibrant, victimized, victorious, vigorous, wanted, weak, weary, wicked, wide awake, withdrawn, worn out, worried, worthless, wimpy, wretched, and wrong. After giving the feeling a name, we are advised to discuss it with an appropriate listener, such as a sponsor or one of our peers, rather than with the committee in our head. In my experience, having feelings, recognizing them, I'm upset. Naming them, I feel angry. Feeling them, this feels awful. And then talking openly about them works. Denying feelings, pretending they don't exist, is about as effective as denying drinking. It doesn't work. Taking action. In addition to talking about our feelings, we can take constructive action regarding them. Anger, a form of focused attention and often the power behind destructive action, can be directed constructively. For example, the wife who gets so angry at her husband's drinking that she joins Al-Anon. Or the TV actress mentioned in Chapter 1 who suffered from chronic lead poisoning and got so angry at her physicians that she discovered the cause of her problem herself. We often hear of alcoholics getting so angry at their sponsors for nagging them about the fourth step that they write it to prove it won't work, only to find it works as well as if they'd thought of it themselves. An important psychological principle is that if we want to change the way we feel, we must first change the way we act. To get over anger, we have to talk it out and act it out constructively. We turn our affective state, anger, into effective action. Conversely, when we bury our feelings, we bury them alive. Bad feelings, such as anger, like a fungus, survive in the dark and grow, while good feelings suffocate and die. On the other hand, good feelings like love and gratitude, when exposed to fresh air and sunlight, expand and grow, while bad feelings shrivel and die. Be your own man, a father told his daughter in a recent TV commercial regarding the purchase of stock certificates. He insisted she purchase them herself rather than rely on a salesman. Be your own person, he tells her. Take a leadership role in your own financial life. Our recovery program tells us to take a leadership role in our emotional life, to be the person emotionally that we want to be, that God wants us to be, rather than the person circumstances and people want us to be. We give up the past and its ability to keep us in the victim role. We alone determine our emotional state. We can't afford to let others do it for us any more than we can let others decide whether or not we will drink. As recovering persons, We are what we think, feel, and do. Others can't, without a gun, control our behavior. Likewise, unless we give them permission, they can't control our thinking or our feelings. To the extent that people, past or present, living or dead, have power over our feelings, it is power we have given them. And we can take that power back at any time. We aren't forced to take it back, but if we don't, we shouldn't whine about what they are doing to us. By giving them the power, we have given them permission to do precisely what they are doing. Progressing in sobriety. Earlier, we established a working explanation of why alcoholics drink. We already knew from personal experience that Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual answer to that problem. And now that we've decided to stop letting others control our emotions, we should find it easy to enjoy long-term, comfortable sobriety. Such would likely be the case if we didn't get involved in marriages and other close interpersonal relationships. These have destroyed many an otherwise powerful sobriety program, but such an outcome can be avoided by developing effective communication skills. Read on. Chapter 4. Interpersonal sobriety, communicating. Sober and married. When asked why he'd spent the previous evening sitting in a bar watching his friends drink, the new AA member stated with obvious pride, "I wanted to test my sobriety." Here's a better test. Stay married for over 50 years to the person you thought drove you to drink. If you manage that, take my word for it, you'll never drink again. Divorces are common in our society, and from what I hear at meetings, they are often distressing and painful. Marriage, on the other hand, as Max and I can testify, isn't a constant state of bliss either. Theoretically, it could be. Alcoholism is a family disease. Everyone is affected, even the family dog. Ideally, they all get into recovery. The alcoholic becomes a permanent, participating, enthusiastic member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The spouse, a permanent, participating, enthusiastic member of Al-Anon. The kids, participating, enthusiastic members of Alateen and later Al-Anon. And the dog enthusiastically greets the many program people who visit the happy home. In this ideal situation, when the partner of the alcoholic is also an alcoholic, they both become active members of both AA and Al-Anon. The net effect is like having a podium in the living room. The home is governed by the traditions, the individual members live by the steps and the slogans, and all agree love and tolerance of others is our code. But even under these circumstances, marital sobriety can't exist without conflict. Physical sobriety follows automatically when we stop drinking. Mental sobriety evolves when we give up drinking and our old ways of thinking. Emotional sobriety begins after we give up drinking and our old attitudes toward people and problems. Marital sobriety, on the other hand, seems to require that we give up not only drinking, but only God knows what else. As was heard at a meeting, when I was drinking, all my spouse wanted was for me to stop drinking. Now that I'm sober, there's no end to what's wanted. During the drinking years, Max wasn't all that easy to live with, and early in sobriety, I thought the courage to change the things we can meant I'd have to choose between my marriage and my sobriety. Getting along well in interpersonal relationships has never been one of my outstanding characteristics. I've never been described as charismatic, and I have no explanations as to why I tend to get along least well with the people who are most important in my life. Sobriety is a growth process. I'm convinced that when we alcoholics hurt, we either drink or grow. If we don't drink, all pain becomes growing pain. In a marriage, when we survive a difficult situation without drinking, drugging, or divorcing, we come out spiritually and emotionally stronger than when we went in. As a couple, we grow together, or we grow apart. We don't stand still. Max has always played an important role in my life, originally as a support, later as an excuse to drink, and more recently as an important adjunct to my total sobriety. Being as close to me as she is, she serves as a mirror in which I see and hear myself. In my reflection, I see who I really am. In this way, our combined lives, including our conflicts, have particular significance for me. Life is a matter of priorities. Take drinking, for example. Either drink and enjoy it, or don't drink and enjoy sobriety. Don't alternate between drinking and not drinking. Don't give drinking and sobriety equal priority. Marriage is similar. We ask ourselves what we are willing to give up to have the kind of relationship we want. Just as physical sobriety is easier to maintain if sobriety is more important than the right to drink, so marital sobriety is easier to maintain if harmony in the home is more important than the desire to convince the other person they are wrong and you are right. Max and I don't think alike. I think vertically, in that I pyramid a problem by narrowing it to a point and coming to a decision. She thinks horizontally, in that she won't make a decision until she asks more questions. She wants more information. I want to condense what we already have. I like to express feelings. She doesn't. She likes to ask directions. I'd rather find it myself. She wants to do it later. I want it done now. I like to keep it simple. She likes it complicated. I like things planned. She likes spontaneity. I answer a question directly. She answers by asking a question. I tend toward optimism. She toward pessimism. I think sequentially in an organized manner. She thinks intuitively in a random manner. We don't even have that many interests in common. In the past, like many other couples, we ended our arguments with, "We probably never should have gotten married in the first place." One of the most basic facts Max and I have discovered is that most of the time, although we differ greatly, neither of us is wrong. Odd as it may seem, we are both right. And whether or not we should have married, we did. Our job today is not to figure out if we should have gotten married, but to decide what are we going to do about it now that we are. The following questions were presented at one of our communication workshops to help couples check their priorities in regard to their relationship. Number 1, to what extent do we work our recovery program in our home? 2, which steps control our relationship? 3, which traditions are practiced in our home? 4, which slogans do we regularly apply to our relationship? 5, how do the promises fit into our relationship? Have we done the 8th and 1/2 steps that precede the promises? 6, having taken the 3rd and 7th steps, do we still criticize, condemn, and complain throughout the day? 7, what part does love play in our relationship, and what actions do we take to show it? 8, how does powerlessness affect our relationship? 9, Is there insanity in our home? 10. Have I turned my will, life, and spouse over to the care of God? 11. Do I have resentments toward my partner? 12. Do I have a sponsor and a working relationship with my sponsor? 13. Am I as aware of my shortcomings as I am of my partner's? 14. Which of my defects that interfere with a happy, comfortable relationship have I not yet asked God to remove? 15. Have I made a list of all persons in my home whom I've harmed, and have I made amends to them all? 16. Do I take my own inventory and promptly admit it when wrong? 17. Do I treat my partner with the same love, tolerance, and respect with which AA and Al-Anon members treat newcomers? 18. Do I have an adversarial relationship with my partner? Does either of us respond defensively to the other, or do we communicate as equals? 19. Am I a victim, or am I a hero or heroine in our relationship? 20. Have we eliminated emotional blackmail from our home? Max and I have worked hard on our relationship, nowhere more intensely than in the area of communication, and nowhere have we needed more help. We haven't turned to professionals to a significant degree. No doubt it would have speeded things up, but we chose to stay with our individual recovery programs and with whatever we could pick up on our own. We've read books, gone to communication workshops, and talked to anyone willing to talk about getting along as a couple. Only a few of the many things we've tried are mentioned here. In general, we find these simple techniques much easier to do than to remember to do. Even more difficult to consistently remember is that feelings are always valid. Whatever feelings either of us has at any particular moment, they are right for us at that time, and they don't have to make sense to anyone else. In addition to the right to feel however we feel, each of us has the right to express our feelings. Expressing feelings honestly and in a manner that does not harm anyone else is known as being assertive. In general, non-assertive people are passive, aggressive, or passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive people think, for example, all right, I'll do it your way, but I won't enjoy it, and neither will you. Assertive is none of these. Nothing has improved communication between Max and me more than learning to think and speak assertively. Many community colleges offer courses in assertion training, and libraries and bookstores have a variety of cassettes and books on the subject. Lately, when anticipating the satisfaction of a particularly passive-aggressive act I am about to commit, a little voice asks me, "Are we going to have to make amends for what we are about to do?" The fun is immediately gone. I hate knowing I'll have to come back later and make amends. I feel miserable after a fight with Max, and I seem to be the one who always needs to make amends. I've learned two important facts about amends. They're easier to make sooner than later, and they're easier to avoid than make. If I don't watch myself, I tend to make fun of Max in front of our friends. It's unfair, and it lowers her self-esteem. Furthermore, I've discovered that it's not possible for me to tear her self-esteem down without tearing mine down too. In like manner, it's not possible to build up her self-esteem without at the same time increasing my own. I like me best when I behave neither passively nor aggressively, when I act neither defensively nor offensively, when I choose my behavior instead of passively reflecting Max's behavior. To accomplish this, I make a conscious effort to remain emotionally independent of her emotional state. In addition, I remember that not only do we each have the right to have feelings and to express them, but we also possess many other rights of which we may not be aware. And not being aware of rights is often the same as not having them. Basic rights. Here are a few examples of basic rights that belong to every one of us. 1. I don't have to give excuses for the things I feel, say, and do. 2. I don't have to feel guilty just because someone else doesn't like what I do, think, or feel. They are responsible for their own feelings. 3. I don't always have to be perfect and logical. 4. I don't always have to answer questions, not even my own. 5. I don't always have to be improving. 6. I don't have to be liked and admired by everyone in everything I do. 7. I don't have to spend the rest of my life trying to gain my parents' or anyone else's approval. 8. I don't always have to do what's best for me. 9. I don't always have to make sense. 10. I have a right to like myself and to say so. 11. I have a right to change my mind. 12. I have a right to like others and to say so. 13. I have a right to sometimes let others make decisions for me. 14. I have a right to not like, agree with, or approve of everything. 15. I have a right to accept or reject any information. 16. I have a right to my own opinion. 17. I have a right to be wrong. 18. I have a right to make mistakes and be responsible for them. 19. I have a right to be confused. 20. I have a right to relax and goof off sometimes. 21. I have a right to a lot more rights than just these. Things go better when Max and I work on ourselves rather than on each other. Although it's painful, and it seems unfair to have to work on oneself when the other person seems so obviously wrong, the results are much more rewarding. We've discovered that the more one partner in a relationship changes, the more difficult it is for the other partner to continue their old behavior. Each of us has little control over the other's actions, considerably less control over their thinking, and little or no control over their emotions. Our only chance to change our partner's behavior is, with God's help, to change our own. As in tennis, if one partner stops hitting the ball back, the other soon stops playing tennis. Max and I have declared our emotional independence of each other. She is no longer responsible for how I feel. I am no longer responsible for how she feels. I can no longer blame her for my feelings. She can no longer blame me for hers. Of course, it would be contrary to my own recovery program for me to deliberately upset her. I'd have to make amends for that. But only I can decide when that is what I am doing. Besides, most of the time, Max's Al-Anon program prevents me from controlling her feelings. Emotional independence also prevents emotional blackmail. Formerly, when Max did things that upset me, I'd pout and treat her badly until she felt guilty and apologized for her behavior. Now, having declared our bilateral emotional independence, I can no longer get away with that, and neither can she. During the drinking years, I thought, you'd drink too if you had my wife. Now, when I become upset, as mentioned earlier, a little voice asks, are you going to drink over this? And when I respond, of course not, it asks, well, if you're not going to reward yourself with the drink, why do you get so upset? And I have nothing to say.
This is the end of side 1. Stop the tape now, turn it over, and begin listening.